Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special episode of True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. This is episode 5 in a series of 8 of the True Hope family files. This episode is titled Media Witchhunt, Solitary Confinement and House Arrest. Enjoy the show.
They're very disappointed. I don't think the world is going to see a better family than David and Stephan were. I've interacted with them and their children many times, and I don't know any other people that treat their kids better. It's very disappointing. We're very disheartened at this event.
What's been the hardest part of this?
The hardest part of it is to see two beautiful people not only lose their son, but then be convicted of what they were convicted of.
This charge, failing to provide the necessaries of life, ensures that people who cannot care for themselves receive the minimal standard of care expected by society. While this particular case, with this particular victim, an 18-month-old child, is incredibly sad, the unfortunate death that resulted has nothing to do with this charge. They definitely loved their son. But as stated in our closing arguments and even in our opening arguments, unfortunately, sometimes love just isn't enough. Parents still have to follow the standard of care that is set by the criminal law.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the True Hope Family Files. This is an 8-part special series here on True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. Last week was part 4, the nefarious vaccine agenda, and today we jump into part 5 of the series, Media Witchhunt, Solitary Confinement and House Arrest. David Stephan is back with me. How are you, David?
You know, I'm doing fairly well, but seeing that video brings up a lot of feelings again, and you know, if I wasn't a more mellow guy, I would say my blood would be boiling right now. But I'm a little bit agitated, just kind of reliving that and seeing what the Crown prosecution was doing with this whole thing and how they were literally pulling the wool over the eyes of the general public. And if the general public was aware of what had just taken place at that point in time, there would have been a major uproar as everybody recognized that their rights as parents had just been demolished in favor of a pharmaceutical agenda. And that's exactly, you know, they're shrouding in, you know, what society or the societal standards are, but they were setting the societal standards. Society wasn't in that moment, and we'll get into that in a moment as to what took place. But I guess we ended off last episode with kind of a cliffhanger of 6 out of 12 jurors came into the courtroom crying. Right? Or it was evident that they had just been crying, but a number of them were still crying. And that's how things left off. And we were left in a state of wondering, where is this about to go?
Absolutely. And just before we jump back into that, I just wanted to make a comment about that video. Yeah, I mean, obviously the trial and the proceedings and everything that goes into it, you know, we've spoken about, this is episode 5 now of, you know, some of the episodes have been 2 hours long. These are in-depth, complicated, very timely trials, and not everyone obviously is present there to witness every minute, every second of like what's going on and taking it all in. And what the majority of Canadians and people around the world are going to experience from that is just what they're shown on their TV by the news and the media. And obviously, especially during part 4, the last episode, we saw that CBC was only present at court hearings when there was like some damning evidence coming from the Crown. You know, clearly, I mean, you don't have to be a super genius to recognize that there was collusion between the Crown, even the courts, and the media to make sure that, you know, when the Crown was coming in with something that they would actually presume to be damning, even though there was missing evidence and missing reports, and, you know, the whole thing was a little bit of a farce. The media just shows the narrative in which they want to be represented doing something that's complex and complicated. And, you know, we just saw I don't know, what was a 60-second, 90-second clip there. And if you were to just watch that, your conclusion of the proceedings, then you might, you might go to one side or the other. But it's just so much more complicated than that. And I think that's another great reason about why we're going into a little bit more detail, getting more in depth in regards to like what actually happened, what was available in regards to evidence and what wasn't. But yeah, we finished off part 4 where you thought that the evidence that you gave to the jury and to the judge was going to be a slam dunk in your guys' favor. But yeah, the jury comes back, half of them are crying. So why don't you just take us back there to that moment?
Yeah. So, when you take a look at it over the previous 2 months, total of a month and a half of trial time during that time, and then about a week and a half or 2 off over Easter break. Really what the jury was subjected to was an incredible narrative to start off with, of just one doctor after the next, and then medical examiner just talking about this very bleak situation that Ezekiel was in. And they stacked it like there was a lot of witnesses. And then we go to get up on stand and there's us. And then we end up getting Annie Savageau. And then we got a local EMS guy who wasn't called out when he should have been called out, because what we didn't talk about is, yes, Ezekiel ended up in an ambulance that was ill-equipped for 8.5 minutes to 12 minutes with no oxygen. But there was an ambulance that was far closer to us, that about 3 minutes into our drive, when we were on 911, we passed within 100 yards of where that ambulance was. So 3 minutes versus another 8 minutes before we would meet up with the other ambulance on the highway. So, a great amount of time could have been averted, and they don't know for sure whether or not that ambulance was properly stocked, but it would have been a much better chance than ending up in an ambulance that we know for a fact wasn't stocked with the proper equipment. So Ezekiel went without an airway for the entirety of his drive to the hospital. So we only had a handful of witnesses take the stand, but the Crown had all of these witnesses. But during that time, the jury is subjected to this incredible narrative that makes us look like demons. And then it gets systematically dismantled within a very short period of time, especially with Annie Savageau taking the stand saying, there's no bacterial meningitis. She couldn't have had the symptoms of bacterial meningitis. So Stephan's couldn't have been ignoring those symptoms, right, if he didn't have it. And then she had a different theory. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, was he would have survived had that ambulance been properly stocked. And so here you've got, Alberta Health Services is on the hook. They're the ones that are guilty for his death, but we're not being charged for his death. And so obviously the court proceedings continue on. And that's why you'll see in that video that Lisa Vike, the Crown prosecutor, says that the death of Ezekiel had nothing to do with the charge, because they had to make that so clear, so delineated, because they knew that the death was a result of Alberta Health Services, not us. It was just, did we endanger his life? And if so, was it a time that we would have foreseen danger? And would have we acted in the way that a reasonably prudent parent would have done so within those circumstances? And that's ultimately what we were debating, was what we were seeing and what we weren't seeing. And that we weren't alarmed as parents. And it's not because we were willfully blind or putting the blinders on. We wanted to ensure that our son had the best of care available if we saw that he even needed care that was, emergent. And there was nothing leading up to his stopping breathing. It happened so quickly. And earlier on that day, he was, becoming playful. And we just thought literally the next day that he was going to be up and running around. So the jury gets this whole picture. But then, and we're thinking slam dunk, right? Because we've just exposed some serious crimes. We just showed that the medical examiner's office is a complete farce. And you have the chief medical examiner of Alberta really highlighting that. Or I guess the former chief medical examiner of Alberta highlighting that on stand in front of the jury. So we think it's a slam dunk, but then the judge does something extraordinary, unprecedented, outside of case law, and he conflates the law. He's supposed to give the jury a very clear and concise charge, and instead he muddles it up, putting them into a situation that, I'm going to kind of, I guess, fast forward here a little bit, but that another judge, a higher judge than him, would say the jury had no choice but to find this couple guilty based on that error in law, right? Like, that's how bad it was. So the jury is put into this predicament. And after 24 hours of deliberation, after receiving the charge, they come out and they, 6 of them had clearly been crying or were still crying. There was a few that looked kind of angry, which is what you'd anticipate if they actually felt that we were guilty. And there was a few that I truly believe probably felt we were guilty. Now, there's other circumstances kind of surrounding that. There was a few times that the judge admonished the jury to ensure that they were not viewing social media. There was two of them, two of the younger jurors that were in their earlier 20s that both went red-faced when he brought that up.
All right.
And our lawyer, Sean Buckley, even made note of that at that point in time. There was another juror who was dealing with some personal circumstances that he shouldn't have been called to the jury. And we felt that way. Sean had made mention of it, saying he shouldn't be put on the jury, like not with what he's dealing with in his personal circumstances within life. Can't be doing that to this guy. So he was already resentful coming into it. Well, I would gain evidence and it would actually become a potential point of appeal. Had we not already had so many points of appeal, it would have found its way into our appeal that would be made later on in relation to the fact that he was having inappropriate conversations with coworkers and being instructed by his coworkers to just find them guilty. And now his coworkers are getting that opinion from the fact that they're watching the mainstream media, and that basically, a lot of Canadians are saying at this point in time, just hanging by the gallows, right? Like right. These monsters. And so he's not supposed to be having those conversations. And that would come up shortly after, well, maybe I don't want to jump the gun yet, but anyways, that evidence would emerge from somebody who was close to me that ended up actually working with him and brought it to my attention about the fact that they had evidence that these conversations were taking place.
Wow. So
there was a few. Those three were definitely angry. There was a few that looked neutral, but then there were 6 that definitely did not want to make that decision. And they did. They felt that they had to based on what the judge had done. So we're shocked. We're absolutely shocked by this. But then, so this is what we hear. We hear guilty. So the verdict comes out. The jury leaves. The judge leaves. You've got a bunch of people in the gallery shaking their heads, people that were interested, people that didn't even really know us. And they're just saying, are you kidding me? Like, you'd have to find us guilty for the time that, this happened with our kid or whatever. Like, that's the ambiance within the gallery from people that do and don't know us, realizing they just opened a can of worms here that literally, based on this precedent, you can just start like handing these charges out like Pez candy. And the Alberta government did. The Alberta Solicitor Generals or the Crown began to hand out these charges like crazy after that conviction just took place, because it opened a major can of worms on the general public. And so we're sitting there, we're just shaking our heads, saying, are you kidding me? Like, what does this mean? Like, up to 5 years in jail, right? Sentencing is going to happen later on. What does this look like? And then there's this older couple in the gallery that start to tell a story, saying, we were driving into Lethbridge and we heard over the radio that you were found guilty. And so we came here to support you, only to find that we walked into a courtroom a few moments before the guilty verdict even was heard. So then I'm shaking my head saying, what the heck is going on here? How is it possible that about 30 minutes before the jury came out and released this guilty verdict, that it's being published over the radio that we were found guilty? How does that happen?
That's
right?
Wild.
Like, it doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen unless there's a lot of interesting behind the door, behind the scenes type, situations happening where people are talking and things are being leaked, which was really the flavor of the whole court case. Like, it was incredibly corrupt from beginning to finish. Absolutely corrupt. Paradigm shaking really for a lot of people within the law society, recognizing that, the integrity of the judicial system has been completely compromised through this particular show trial that they're ramming through. And for what purpose? Well, to monopolize, the pharmaceutical industry through fear of criminality, right? Parents now are going to feel compelled to consume the products of the pharmaceutical industry or face potential criminal charges. Like, that's really what's being thrown in the balances here. Yeah. So it's really absolutely crazy.
Yeah, big threats being thrown out for sure. And for a lot of parents that might choose not to not to vaccinate or not to immunize or to even do other things at home before they might go to the hospital. Things that are, they're only a few thousand years old, some of these remedies, and proven to work. And yeah, it's scary. It's scary as parents. So I've got a couple of young kids, and it's just to know the details of this case. And yeah, in my opinion, it's a show trial where trying to make a significant example of you guys to ram home legislation and to inevitably just end up creating more profits for pharmaceutical companies. It's actually it's not actually, it's just absolutely foul, to be honest.
Absolutely. Like it's so incredibly low. You take a family that has just lost their son. You want to talk about pain. Like, it doesn't get worse than that as a parent. No. And then you're going to try to exploit that death through falsifying an autopsy report, to try to push this phenomenal agenda at the same time that you're telling the public it's one thing, when in reality it's a completely other thing. So the public are literally cheering as their rights are being removed. Like, anybody who was in the courtroom saw a completely different picture than what was being made available over CBC and then CTV and Global and everybody else. Completely different picture. And that's why, actually, like, when we take a look at that one article that you had up before, that literally the courtroom was shocked, right? Yeah. That everybody that was there was just like, are you kidding me? Like, it was just exposed that the autopsy report was flawed. He didn't have bacterial meningitis. He didn't have right pleural empyema. He couldn't have possibly died from that and bacterial meningitis when there wasn't scientific evidence to back up the bacterial meningitis. And there was an X-ray showing clear lungs upon arrival. This is what the people in the courtroom were seeing. And then you have the judge go and pull a move like that, which I'm gonna put it out there. I'm not gonna say it emphatically because I don't know 100% for sure. Either he was just completely this judge, I think Rodney Jerky, Judge Jerky, anyways, was either completely inept and shouldn't be playing the role of a judge, or completely corrupt and taking his marching orders to ensure that this was a guilty verdict. Whatever he was, either way, he should not be sitting as a judge. Either he should be sitting behind bars intentionally, if he did intentionally skew that case, he should be sitting behind bars for what he did. Or the other one is that he's just that ignorant and he should not be playing the role of a judge. He just doesn't have the intellect to do so, because it was argued that what he was doing was against case law, and yet he still pushed forward with it, and it achieved a guilty verdict. A wrongful conviction is what it achieved. So that was really kind of the beginning. Now the dominoes are starting to really fall in relation to our lives. Everything's being disrupted. Like, before this point in time, I'm publicly presenting for 3 years, no hiccups. I'm being invited to these health shows. I don't have to apply to them anymore. I'm being invited. I'm being given preferential treatment. They're giving me the good stages. They're giving me the good times on the stages. It's just like, I'm welcomed where I'm going, and it's making a significant impact in thousands and thousands of Canadians, where we're getting this information out there, right, about our products and what they're doing. And what was once a really small element of the business, being our retail division, all of a sudden becomes a real viable entity in a very short period of time, because of the information that I'm able to get out there and to convey. And I'm keeping very busy traveling around for months out of the year during the high season times, October, November, and then January, February, March, spending a significant amount of time on the road away from my family, building this business up to get the information out there to be a blessing to people that, hey, you don't need to be on psychiatric medications. I was going to say to feel well, but very rarely would you ever feel any sense of wellness while on one of those medications. In fact, numbness is typically what you'd experience with a host of side effects typically. But that there's another option, a better option, a more natural option, an option that gets right to the root of what people are dealing with, right? The fact that they don't have the proper nutrition to convert cholesterol and amino acids into the various hormones needed to help with mood, but also the production of neurotransmitters coming from amino acids that now are supplying the coenzyme factors, being the vitamins and minerals, to facilitate that production. So now people are getting their brain chemistry normalized, their hormones are getting better, and they're just feeling better. They're feeling more vibrant, a greater sense of vitality in their life. And that was really what was being conveyed. And the proof was in the pudding. So now it's beginning to spread like word of mouth, because people get well and they start to speak. They start to share what they've found to work in their lives. So now we get to 2016. Uninterrupted business, doing very well with it. People, they're aware that I've been charged. They know what's going on. In fact, I'm incorporating that into my presentations to make sure that there isn't an element of people feeling like they're being duped, that I'm hiding something. I'm being just forthcoming and saying, this is what's going on. This is where we're going there. And then obviously post 2014, there's an agenda to this. They're looking to push the vaccines, through a criminal liability element here. And now we get to 2016 and we are wrongfully convicted.
That's right. And so shortly after that period of time, you start seeing presentations, events starting to be cancelled. I think your sister Celeste filled in for you on some of those, but there was just clearly an issue post that verdict. And then quite shortly you had the sentencing hearing, right?
Yeah, actually, let's back up just for 1 second here to give context as to what took place here. So remember, we had discussed, I'll mention a couple names, that there's a few people that have really put themselves out there to try to destroy Truehope. And Terry Polvoy, he's a dermatologist out of Waterloo, Ontario, is one of them. And Marvin Ross.
A skin doctor.
Skin doctor, yeah, as if he's an expert in psychiatry and can say whether or not our products are working. Now, he runs a site called Quackwatch, and he attacks chiropractic. He was attacking Hulda Clark until he finally got his backside suit off of him and lost, and for all of his libelous claims. But he just continues to go. Why? Because there's something in it for him. There's something that's motivating, because he doesn't make enough money as a dermatologist to even keep things flowing. And that was exposed at one point in time too, showing that really he's just a pharma shill. Mm-hmm. And so you got Marvin Ross as well working with them. And they actually wrote a 200 and some odd page book called Pig Pills Inc. back in the early 2000s to try to defame Truehope. So they're putting that kind of effort in. I think they made a few sales on that book. Not enough to actually,
I've never heard of either of them, and I've never heard of that book. So,
no, they're behind the shadows type guys, but they would reemerge in relation to our case. Now they're looking for any reason they can get in order to prevent Truehope from getting out there. There's a significant pharmaceutical push to prevent this from happening. And the reason being is that we're not just providing an option for people to get well. We're at the same time providing programs that help people come off of the medication safely and effectively. And we're not just helping people and individuals, we're also training doctors from around North America, actually around the world, but mainly in North America, on how to utilize these protocols. And many of them are switching over to more of a holistic approach because they're seeing their patients get way better than they'd ever seen them get before on any of the combination of medications they've given them. So there's a huge push to prevent me from being able to go and speak, right? Because at this point in time in Canada, I'm the face of Truehope, right? Under instruction from my father to do so. So I'm taking on all these presentations and doing a lot of them. And so the first presentation that would then get canceled, and I'm not exactly sure why, because I don't think that there was any pressure from Terry Polvoy, Marvin Ross, or anybody that's affiliated with them, which we discovered there's a lot of people affiliated with them, including one particular journalist that was working for, I think he probably still is working for, the Globe and Mail. And so basically they had the media in their hands and constantly just pushing these articles out, just doing the pharmaceutical industry's bidding, using the media, where now people that are reading it are thinking it's, fair, unbiased, and objective reporting. It's not, completely not. So May of 2016 rolls around. So April, we are convicted. May, we're still out and about. June is when the sentencing hearing is going to happen. We're going to find out, do we go to jail? Do we not go to jail? What does this look like? But May is when CHFA was that year in Vancouver, CHFA West. So we discussed this, I think, 2 episodes ago. about our long-standing relationship with CHFA, exposing that there was corruption there, that they were receiving backdoor money from Agri-Food Canada, and ultimately that they were helping to guide and corral the whole natural health industry into compliance with the government, when in reality they were supposed to be the party that stood between us and the government and protected the natural health industry from the government. And so they were actually doing, in a very roundabout way, the bidding of the government versus standing for their members who are paying their memberships, being the natural health industry as a whole. So we had, at this point in time, a little bit of a relationship with CHFA. In 2015, I had gone and I'd presented there at the CHFA event, and great turnout. And a lot of the retailers, a lot of the stores, health food stores, they'd go to these presentations to get education and all that. And they loved it. I mean, we had a full room, completely full room. And there was a lot of them wondering, are we going to come back again and present again? Because, they're all affiliated with each other. These different retailers are connected. And so they were going to direct, from the year before saying, hey, go and see this guy speak. So there was already some interest like generating over the fact that I was going to be there. And CHFA reaches out of the blue without even discussing anything with me. They just reach out with a decision and it said, we're canceling your presentation. So, okay. Heard back a little bit later on that supposedly, and this is just one of the excuses, that they were concerned that there's a potential that I might speak about the court case in there, as if, and here's what's interesting now. CBC at this point in time is absolutely exploiting the court case to attack the natural health industry. So we're found guilty. It's not done and over with. Now they're running cross-country radio shows and stuff like that, putting into question, should naturopaths be licensed in Canada? So they're actually attacking the whole naturopathic realm within Canada, and they're springboarding off of our case. Because why? We went and bought a tincture from the naturopath when we were in Lethbridge the day that we brought Ezekiel in, when we went to go sign lawyers' papers, and he was doing well. And by the time that noon rolled around, he had no visible symptoms, and then woke me up from a nap playing with my lip, that type of thing. So at that point in time, we bought a tincture just to make sure that, hey, we're doing more than what we were doing before, just to ensure that, we kick this thing, whatever it is, whatever we're working with here, that it's completely gone, because we're getting tired of the low-lying residual symptoms that once again did not manifest as infection. And that nurse had been by the night before he went to the crisis, checked his blood pressure, heart rate, lungs, listened to all the vitals, everything came back normal. There was nothing of concern at that point. So now CBC is exploiting some of the facts, and they're twisting the facts from the court case and saying, basically, should we have, de-license all the naturopaths across Canada? And we want to hear what you have to say about it. So they're inciting this conversation across Canada on this. I think they actually call it Cross Country Canada is what the radio show was called. So they're doing this. So this has a major impact on the whole natural health industry, where they're trying to exploit my son's death to now attack the natural health industry, because they had to forfeit the vaccine element, because they would have lost so terribly in the courts. It would have probably set a reverse precedent, saying vaccines are unavoidably unsafe and ineffective, right? Something to that effect. Like that's what we were going to establish in the court proceedings. So the court ran, or the Crown ran from it. So now they're attacking the natural health industry, but CHFA is saying, we don't want you speaking at our event because you might bring up the court case that's incredibly relevant to the whole natural health industry. Really? So once again, whose bidding are they doing? They were actually operating. They were actually helping to suppress very crucial information that the whole industry needed to be aware of, right? That we had just suffered a tremendous loss through this wrongful conviction, that as a whole, Canadians had just suffered a tremendous loss in relation to medical choice and parental freedoms.
Yeah, well, the Crown, if they're going to, and the media, if they're going to, their primary agenda is to get people on as many pharmaceuticals as possible, taking the natural health industry out or doing its large damage by attacking naturopaths, attacking homeopathy, even chiropractic, I guess, like alternative medicine. That would be a really great way of pushing more and more people to being more skeptical about those types of practices and leading more towards conventional medicine and drugs.
Yeah. And going back to the conviction. So as soon as we were convicted, and discussions were happening now with the Crown, this new statement kept on emerging. And what it was well, based on the criminal code approved standard of care. Now, we'd never heard that before in the court case, but as soon as we were convicted, there was this criminal code approved standard of care. Now, I've got a criminal code just on my shelf over here. Okay, I mean, it's a little bit of an older one. I think it's a 2010. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, I'd gone through it and perused it and whatnot in years past. And I've never seen anything about a criminal code approved standard of care. There's nothing written in there in relation to what that is. But what had just been achieved is that now, directly attached to the charges of failing to provide the necessaries of life, there's now an attachment to it that if you fail to subject yourself or your child or anybody under your care to allopathic medicine, if you choose first and foremost, you know, let's say homeopathy, or maybe it's Ayurvedic medicine, or traditional Chinese medicine, or naturopathic medicine, if you chose that first, even though your child wasn't in dire circumstances, things seemed kind of fine, but then something went awry, you've now stepped outside of the criminal code approved standard of care because you did not subject yourself to allopathy. So they just monopolized allopathic or Western medicine, or let's call it for what it is, petroleum-based Rockefeller medicine, because that's actually where the roots of allopathic medicine comes from, is John D. Rockefeller, right? Many people don't understand that. And you know, we've been so incredibly brainwashed as Western society that we actually put Western medicine up on this pedestal where it doesn't belong. Because when we take a look at it, when we look at the rise of disease, if Western medicine was working, we would see a diminishment in disease, not a rise in disease, a diminishment. But yet what we've seen since the inception of this medicine is that the general populace is becoming more and more and more unhealthy decade after decade after decade. And you can see it statistically speaking. You can see it in the rise of mental illness. You can see it in the rise of thyroid issues, endocrine system issues. You can see it in the rise of cancers. It's there. That all major chronic disease is rising at astronomical levels. And yet we have all this Western medicine, but clearly it's not working. And so they just monopolize that medicine, saying, you can wake up and you can see that medicine's corrupt and you're going to try to pull out of it. And that's going to be a bad thing for the bottom line of the pharmaceutical industry. So we're going to force you back in. We're going to force you back in and stop doing your own research. Rely on the doctors because, well, they've been subjected to 7+ years of indoctrination in the schools. And they think that they know what they're talking about because they've invested, well, over $100,000 into that education or indoctrination. And so surely they want to hold on to that and think that it is superior above and beyond all other forms of information or medicine out there.
Yeah, another way of looking at it is that for a long period of time, people have become so disconnected from, let's just say, their grandparents or their great-grandparents' ways of treating illness, treating disease, which would have been traditional use medicine. And it's been obviously very, very demonized. And the only other option would be conventional for a lot of people. And that's all you see. I mean, we're lucky in Canada, but we don't have what the USA and what New Zealand has in regards to TV ads of pharmaceutical drugs on every single channel, every single day. We're lucky not to have that, but still we do have the indoctrination of doctors, but also the general public in general. Like, you have something even remotely wrong with you, people have no idea, so they just go to a doctor and listen to what that doctor says, rather than perhaps, you know, maybe even just like 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that a family member or someone within that smaller community would have some actual knowledge of herbs and a knowledge of homeopathy and a knowledge of natural medicine that would actually be very, very beneficial to those individuals. But that knowledge is gone now. We don't have that trust in ourselves. We don't have that knowledge base. So if something goes wrong, we have to go somewhere. We have to go to somebody in a white jacket from a place of authority, and we don't really know about like what they're learning. Well, we do, but most people don't know what they're learning about. We don't know where their education is really funded from, where their universities get the majority of the money to push curriculums in certain directions. Yeah, people certainly aren't aware of those things.
Yep, exactly. And at the end of the day, all doctors have really become, unless they step out of the traditional role that they've kind of fit into, is they've just become glorified salesmen for the pharmaceutical industry. That's really what they've been corralled into, and it's unfortunate because a lot of people are going in and trying to become doctors to help people, right? Some people are doing it because, well, they can get a good, comfy paycheck, right? Every month after month after month, and you can have your Lexus or whatever it is that you so choose. But there are some people that are authentically going in to try to change the world and make it a better place. And unfortunately, that education is designed to corral them into basically just becoming parrots for the pharmaceutical industry, just taking what the pharmaceutical reps have to say about a particular drug and just parroting that and just pushing onto clients. So it's an unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
So that's really what we just observed in relation to the conviction, was that they had just solidified criminally now a criminal code approved standard of care, and that it is exclusive to allopathic medicine. And it doesn't matter how much scientific papers that you have to back up, well, you didn't give him antibiotics. So, okay, well, what if I chose to give him olive leaf extract? Well, that's not found within allopathy. Okay, but there's all these studies that show that it's incredibly antibacterial, right? But once again, we see that type of stuff being purged as well online.
Yeah.
Right. Like there was, anyways, that's a different rabbit hole, but you'll see the emergence of these studies pop up and you'll wish that you would have printed them off, because you'll go back to find them even when you bookmark them, and you just don't find them because they're going right up against the bottom line profits of the pharmaceutical industry. So I got canceled at CHFA. That was the first cancellation I'd had in relation to presentation. So I still showed up, still talked to the president or whatever. She seemed a little bit sheepish, kind of just off, but whatever. Okay. And then it was shortly after that we had to go in for the sentencing hearing. But there were some details. I don't want to go too deep into them, but we were living in BC at this point in time. We had moved to Nelson, and we were there for the better part of a year up on the side of a mountain on an off-grid property. It was phenomenal. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was, the best place to be as we're preparing for court. It was just paradise. And we were just, we had this opportunity arise that we can go and do that and do so at minimal cost, kind of just taking care of this property. And anyways, but we had the majority of our stuff there anyways. And we didn't know if we would be, admitted to jail. Because if so, you can't go and pack up and it's not our property, right? We are taking care of the property for somebody else. So we're wondering, do we need to move? Do we not need to move? Like, what does this look like? So then we found ourselves, from the latter weeks of May to the second week of June, packing everything up, not knowing if we get to stay there or not, right? So, and we would have loved to have stayed there. So we're packing everything up into a semi-trailer and just wondering, what do we do with this? So we end up going and parking the semi-trailer down the road at a secure location in case maybe we could go back, right? But we just didn't know. But we couldn't leave that burden on somebody else to go and pack up our stuff, if both myself and Colette are behind bars. And so Sean Buckley actually did put in a request with the courts to find out, can we have an understanding of where this is going so that they, my clients know whether or not they need to be packing up or not, right? Because this is a pretty big deal for them. And they wouldn't budge on anything. They didn't, they wouldn't throw us a bone. So we pack everything up. We end up in Alberta. We're now staying at my parents' place. And during this time, there's what's called the Vaxxed Tour. Del Bigtree, he was a producer for The Doctors TV show, which, by the way, they wanted me on there. But I got a real bad feeling about it. My father had actually gone as a, preempt. He'd gone and spoken on The Doctors show during court while we were in court, but then they wanted us to show up after court and go and speak. But we knew exactly where they're going based on the fact that they were using it to say, basically, parents, get your childhood or get your children their childhood vaccines. So I knew that it was going to be an uphill battle, and I wasn't in a place at that point in time that I was feeling overly confident to fly down to believe it was Los Angeles, and go into this, den of lions and see if I
Yeah.
came unscathed. And so anyways, Del Bigtree was a producer for the doctor's show, and he had left it, and after he discovered that there were some serious issues with vaccines. So he started digging in, and he produced a documentary with Andy Wakefield called Vaxxed. And so he was on what was the Vax tour, where they're doing this cross North America tour, actually is what it was. Well, interestingly, like 2 days before our sentencing hearing, he was in Calgary, and he had become aware of us through numerous people saying, hey, you got to be aware of this story, what's going on with them. So we went and met with him. He ended up doing some videoing of us that for a follow-up documentary, but it never did happen, I guess. But they have a bunch of footage of us that's like pretty fresh and raw, right before we'd go back to court again and find out, do we go to jail or not. But anyway, so we were there. We showed up at the theater. He at the end of the show announced us while he was up on stage, had us stand up, everybody cheered or whatever, and he introduced us as heroes. I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm a hero. I'm just a man of conviction, and I stand for my values. So when they offered me the plea bargain, saying plead guilty and we'll give you 18 months probation, right? It's going to save you a lot of trouble, and Colette gets off scot-free. Plus, we pay for her grief counseling. I couldn't do it because it went against my values. I couldn't lie to take the easy way out, plus set a precedent for other parents. So that doesn't make me a hero. That just makes me a man of conviction, that I want to be able to sleep at night. I want to know that I've done the right thing so I can sleep at night. That's worth it for me. So I've received the reward, right? Yeah, I've gone through hell, but I received the reward knowing that I haven't compromised my conscience, right? But anyway, so he introduced us as heroes, and whatever, right? We're just, and I'm just standing up to defend the rest of my family, to make sure that my children have parents available as well. So right after, he does a live stream. Now, I'd never done a live stream. I don't know how they operated at the point in time. I was pretty ignorant. So he did a live stream of it. I think, do we have that available?
Yeah, I'll get this on.
All right.
Absolutely.
I think it's important for the audience to see, I wasn't the best composed through it, and it would come back to kick me in the backside.
Yeah, I'll play it now. Let me know if you can hear it.
It's becoming quite an issue. It's becoming quite a parental rights issue. It's becoming quite an issue. It's becoming quite a parental rights issue for medical choice, for how we need to treat our children, and ultimately it comes down to whether we have the right to vaccinate or not vaccinate without being held criminally liable, or whether or not we have to rush our children to the doctor every time they even get just the sniffles, in fear that something may just randomly happen and then we're held criminally liable. So, yeah. And this is about everybody. This isn't the way that the media has played it out to be. They've tried to distance us from the average person by trying to say that he was too stiff as a board to get into his car seat. He had to be fed somehow through an eyedropper. He was being treated for meningitis with maple syrup and fruit and berries. That's not the case at all. We were treating our child with different homeopathic remedies, different herbal remedies like tens of thousands of people do, nothing out of the ordinary, and he wasn't severely ill. And then everything just came to a crash on an evening, and we ended up in an ambulance that didn't have the right equipment, and subsequently ended up brain dead.
What do you think about, what are you going to say to those kids if you have to go to prison? What is the thought?
It's a hard thing to try to communicate that to a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old as to why mommy and daddy won't be around anymore. Our 8-year-old is already somewhat understanding of the issue and is already taking it quite badly.
Yeah, wow, that's some deep stuff right there. I mean, what a question by Dell at the end there, but it's something that all parents can connect with, especially if they actually know the facts of the case.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
So that video, Dell would come under major fire for having that video. Now he was already part of the Vax tour. He was going around the US and Canada doing the Vax tour. And of course, there was a lot of adversity to that. But in relation to that particular video, it was notable to him because we've had follow-up conversations since then. Kind of a bit of a laugh because I ran into him out of the blue. Didn't realize, I wasn't expecting to run into him in May of 2018. Had a laugh about it because I said, that video helped get me into jail. And he said, well, that's okay, because I also came under major fire for having that video. So we both suffered from that video.
Wow.
Because the truth was not supposed to come out on our case. It just wasn't. They were doing everything they could within their power to ensure that they were establishing the narrative through the media, and that there was no diminishment from that narrative. And so then what we find is 2 days later, we're now at the sentencing hearing, and there's a big screen TV pulled up on one of those roller carts up to the front of the courtroom. And sure enough, what's playing? That video's playing. And what the Crown and the judge are now discussing, because the judge is livid, right? He's got emotional investment into this particular trial, clearly. For some reason, he didn't like the truth coming out, and that become a theme over the next number of years after trial after trial and appeal and all that type of stuff. That these judges, most of them, just had a real issue with the truth, a real issue. And I'm talking not the subjective truth according to David Stephan. I'm talking the truth on black and white. Like, yeah. They just had a real issue with the truth coming out, including that ambulance issue, right? Like, shoo that under the rug. That's got nothing to do with anything, right? It doesn't matter that Alberta Health Services had just engaged in criminal negligence and removed life-saving equipment, not ran out, but proactively removed the equipment from the ambulances in the South Zone, and that my son needed that equipment, and that they basically finished him off. Like, that was like, it was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, aside from the dose of rocuronium bromide that was contraindicated for electrolyte imbalance that they gave him later and put him into full cardiac arrest, even though he was starting to reanimate and breathe on his own. His heart was starting to beat on its own at that point, and then they gave him that medication. But so it was just one issue after the next with Alberta Health Services or their contractors or staff. So we find that video being played, and the judge and Crown are having this conversation about no remorse. Now, this is 4 years out. I have, as a parent, like, unless you're just fully disconnected, you will beat yourself up to no end over the would have, could have, should have, what could have you done better. You're a parent. It's wired into you to be protective of your children. And when you fail, when something happens, even when you don't understand it, you don't understand what took place, you will beat yourself up. That's just the nature of parents. Like, that's, or any connected parent, unless you've got an issue, like, you're a sociopath or a psychopath or something like that. Maybe you could be numb to it. I'd already gone through that process. 2012, 2013, 2014. I still live with it. I'm not going to share it with the courts that are trying to suppress the truth, that are railroading us with everything. I'm not going to share what my innermost feelings are, that, I feel like dirt as a parent when I reflect on it and say, what could have I done better to prevent my son from going into that situation? So now they're saying no remorse. Why? Because I'm exposing the fact that they're ramming this corrupt agenda down all of our throats, that they're misrepresenting it in the media, that the Crown is complicit, the courts have become complicit in it, and now we have a wrongful conviction, and they're demanding remorse? I don't think so. Like, where are the Alberta Health Services staff that removed that equipment from the ambulance? How come they're not up on charges for criminal negligence resulting in death, which is a far greater charge? That's up to 25 years in jail, not up to 5. And yet there is a clear-cut case of that. Like, it is so clear-cut. The Crown had their case made for them. If they were really caring about human life and they wanted to deter these types of issues from happening, they would have had some Alberta Health Services staff up on stand, and they would have had them convicted, and they would be in jail probably still to this day. So here we are now. They're demanding remorse. So because of that, because I ticked the judge off, he sentences me to 4 months in jail. I believe it's going to be just over 2 months on good behavior. He sentences Colette to 3 months house arrest, which was a blessing. That actually caused an eruption in the courtroom, a good eruption, because we were all concerned with how this whole thing went down, that they were going to, the Crown was pushing for, at this point in time, at first they were pushing for 12 months in jail, right? After the conviction. Then that video surfaces. Now they're pushing for like 36 to 48 months in jail, right? They're pushing for 4 years. and they just keep on stretching it. Every time that I keep on standing up and speaking, they're just stretching it out, right? And so anyways, there was an eruption based on the fact that my wife was going to be able to be at home on house arrest, but with the kids. And that was a major concern for everybody. So it was a beautiful thing. To hear that, it should have never happened in the first place. In fact, you know, had this been proper and upright, we would have received an apology letter from Alberta Health Services from the get-go. They would have said, we're going to waive your $500 fee for the ambulance that didn't have the right equipment anyways and resulted in the death of your son. So we're not going to go and try to charge you that $500, but they did. You know, and here's some compensation for wrongful death rather than trying to take us to court for it because it's so clear cut. So rather than engaging in doing the upright thing, they engage in a massive cover-up and then tried to exploit my son's death to push an agenda. So, you know, I'm ticked over the whole of it. So now, here's what the media is doing. Basically, I'm being labeled as an unremorseful baby killer. Now,
that's quite a thing to go into jail with, right?
The irony is that there is a justice system in jail amongst the inmates, and that unremorseful baby killers don't fare well. So you may have been sentenced to jail, but we're going to make sure that, you know, you don't make it out alive, right? Or that there's some other, or if you do make it out alive, that you're going to be largely unrecognizable. So now it's a Friday. We're sentenced on a Friday. The sentence hearing took place over the Thursday and Friday. And so I'm taken into cuffs down into the basement of the courtroom. My wife is taken into cuffs down to the basement of the courtroom as well until they process her, and then they're going to release her. So we're in separate cells. Don't even know where we're at. One of the most beautiful things, I'm just sitting there down there just like, just pondering, what is all this about? What the heck, right? And then I hear my beautiful wife singing down the hallway, right? Singing a beautiful melody. It was like hearing the voice of an angel at that point in time, right? After going through all of that, to hear her in that state, to be giving some form of praise, right, amongst the middle of the storm. And so she gets processed. She passes my door when they get, you know, so we get a quick say bye type of thing through the little glass slot in the door. And then I'm taken out and I get to go to jail. Yay. And it takes a long time. So I'll get there. I've, you know, had breakfast that Friday morning, missed the supper meal. And so now I'm waiting for Saturday meal, right? So now I'm in jail and I go to get processed into jail. And there's an intake form. And there's a checkbox on there that I can check general public. And I'm thinking, of course I'm going to go to general public. Like, I want to interact with people. I want to, you know, if I'm going to be here, I want to be a blessing. Like, I want to, you know, I want to interact with people. I want to share, you know, beautiful message with people. I just like, right? Like that's what's going to make me thrive. Well, the intake officer says, if you check that box, I'm not putting you there. I said, well, why not? He says, because of this type of high profile case, for your protection, you're not going to be anywhere around any other inmates. And I sat there and thought about it for a minute. And my naivety, I'm thinking, well, I can handle myself. Yeah, no, maybe not with a surprise attack of 5, 6, 7, whatever inmates who want to do an unremorseful baby killer. So I get sent to some back area of the jail where now I'm in solitary confinement, and I'm just sitting there. I'm sitting in my cell for 22 to 23 hours a day, just in this corner cell, no sunlight, and they'll let me out. On a good day for 2 hours, where 1 hour I get to spend on the phone, right? Or close to. And the other hour, they'll let me go have a shower, or go grab some cleaning equipment and clean my room, which I clean my room top to bottom. All the graffiti, everything, all the volatile, vulgar stuff on the walls got removed. They were probably happy. And they moved me from one cell to the next a few times, probably because they were just like, hey, let's see if this guy can clean up right the whole jail here and bring everything back to its normal order, because I just couldn't stand being in the presence of all the vulgar stuff. The only thing I ever left on one of the walls was a beautiful scripture verse, right, that I left on that was quite encouraging. So a Bible verse, I left that on, but everything else around it was completely sterilized and clean. So they'd let me then go out into what they called the yard, which wasn't the yard. It was a cement thing that was roofed in, and there was a grate at the end, so I could see some blue sky, but never once did I see the sun. So that was 21 days, solitary confinement. And then I finally got out on appeal. And so we had appealed the case. Now it got concerning because what happened was we were going to appeal, but then while I was in jail before we had a chance to appeal, and there was some talk about, do we appeal, do we not, do we just let it run its course? I mean, it's 4 months, right? And on good behavior, it's only 2/3 of the time. So really, it's going to be 2.5 months type of thing, right? Like, yeah, I'll lose that summer. I'll never get that summer back, but whatever, right? But what happened was I got served while in jail, and it was the Crown serving me. And what it was an appeal from their end, where they wanted to appeal the sentence, and they were now demanding up to 5 years in jail. And I'm thinking, well, on good behavior, 2/3, like that's a handful of years, right?
Yeah.
Like at least about 3 years type of thing. Like, that's not good. And I don't trust the courts. I'm not supposed to be here, but they don't like, and I'm writing from jail as well. Like I'm writing documents and stuff like that are quite scathing. I just have a problem, I guess. When you get me into a situation that's unjust, I don't shut up. I just don't, right? And so I'm writing documents and stuff, letters from jail that I'm about to release, all this type of stuff, and they know it. They know what's going on, and they're monitoring my mail, everything going in and out, right? Like everything's monitored, my phone calls, everything out. All my communication is monitored, so they know what I'm up to. And so, anyways, we get this appeal from the Crown, and we're like, oh, we have to appeal. There's no choice about it, right? So if there's any questions about whether we should just go along with it, no, because our appeal comes before the Crown's appeal. And so we appealed to have the whole thing overturned. And this is we finally got out. It took longer than anticipated, but 3 weeks. 3 weeks of solitary confinement, and I finally got out. And at that point in time, it's a lengthy process to get out. Like I thought I would be out, I don't know if it's a Friday or whatever it was. I think it was probably a Friday. And I'm thinking if I don't get out on Friday, then I'm stuck in there the weekend before they can then process me on the Monday. And it just seems like they're taking their sweet time, because I was supposed to, all the paperwork was supposed to be done and everything. I'm supposed to be out Friday morning, and I'm waiting. It's afternoon. It's now getting almost into the early evening. And so then they move me into, the general processing area again, and I'm waiting there. And then I get called into the DDO's office, the Deputy Director of Operations. Okay, so basically top guy at the jail. And he pulls me in there and he sits me down. And I'm not sure if he does this with every inmate, right, on their way out. But he took the time with me, and what he said to me was probably quite different than every other inmate, and that was just evidenced by his speech. He says, we've got rapists and we got killers in here. We got people that belong in here. He says, when we heard that you were going to be in here, we just thought that was the worst thing. Like, you don't belong here. And he says, in my 22 years of doing this, of being, operator here, he says, I've never seen anything like this. He says, half of my staff want to bake a cake for you and bring it into you. And he says, and the other half, and he's trying to find his words, right? He's just sitting there thinking, and I just respond back, want to bake me in a cake? And he just busts out laughing. Yeah, exactly, right? He'd never seen that, right? Because and a lot of these guards, that you can just see them, they become quite cynical because they're dealing with people that they see as lowlives, like that they've judged as that, right? Day in, day out, and that are unruly and uncooperative and whatever, right? And they just become quite cynical. And so for half of his staff, approximately, based on what he said, I mean, he didn't specify, 53, 47 or whatever. Like he said half my staff, for half of them to be sympathetic to me and realize that there was injustice that had taken place as to what got us in there is quite phenomenal, because they were being subjected to the same media garbage that everybody else was. And that's what they had to judge this whole situation off of, that even with all of the media distortions and fabrications, they were able to read between the lines and see the truth of it. And we experienced that a lot with a lot of people throughout the process. So anyways, we had that meeting, and then he just said, I just hope to never ever see you here again, because it's just wrong. Like, you should have never been here. So I'm released. My beautiful wife is standing outside. She couldn't come into the jail. She's not allowed to because she has a criminal record. So she's standing outside waiting for me in a vehicle, and we go on our merry way. Now we're appealing. Media reaches out to me about the appeal. Of course, I open my mouth and I'm talking about stuff. They publish an article, a little bit distorted, wasn't quite reminiscent of the entire conversation we had. And what it does is it causes the Alberta appeals courts to say, oh, we're going to fast track this one. Now, this is unprecedented because those that are in jail that are appealing, that have not gotten out on appeal, they come first because they're still doing time and they're appealing. They always come first. People like me, in my situation, I'm out on appeal. You get put on the back burner. Why? Because I'm not doing time. I'm on probation, right? I'm under conditions, but I'm not doing time. Well, they decided to fast track it because typically it's about 18 months before you have an appeal hearing. Now they're fast tracking it to like 7 months. Oh, interesting. Well, there's 3,500 pages of transcripts from the first trial that the appeal lawyer has to go through and then draft up an argument, a factum, a 30-page factum, and submit that. She doesn't have time to do that within that short period of time because it's not a full 7 months that she has to do that. She has to have her stuff done a few months previous. So then the Crown then takes a look at it, and then they put out their 30-page factum to rebut it, and then it gets submitted to the courts, and then they have a chance to look at it look at both of them well in advance, and then we get to go before them and have a hearing where now it gets to be argued after the panel of 3 judges has reviewed everything. So 7 months time, 7-8 months, something like that, but yet we've got months, 3,500 pages, basically the Bible, right? 3,500 pages of transcripts to go through to identify all the appealable points. So we end up having to employ a second lawyer, and they split the transcripts. And so now one's representing Colette, one's representing me. They split it. They get together, and we're collaborating with them on a regular basis, and they're just saying, like, we're just reading all this and we're saying, did this actually happen in court? Like, it's just constant, like the drama and everything, like the stuff that the Crown was allowed to get away with in that trial was phenomenal and just criminal. It was just so outside of the bounds of court. It was a circus, literally. And it was well known that court case was a circus. Unfortunately, most people in their myopic viewpoint thought it was a circus because we turned it into a circus, when in reality, all parties involved were the circus. I was calling stuff out, behind the scenes and all that outside of court, which is very abnormal for somebody who has been charged with criminal charges to ever speak publicly. And I'm just blabbing and speaking the truth. And then you've got the Crown within the courtroom, just playing all sorts of tactics and antics and all sorts of stuff. And it's evident in the transcript. So we end up in the appeals court. 2017. Okay, so we appeal in July of 2016, and by, I believe it was about March of 2017, we're in the appeals courts. And we're thinking, easy. Why? Our appeal lawyer, she's a specialist in appeals. She said, normally I have to actually kind of look for appealable points and stretch them out, right? To stack the deck. She says, in this particular situation, I'm actually having to omit. We have too many appealable points within this trial, like too many. So I'm only focusing in on the strongest ones. So it was no problem for her to find the appealable points throughout the transcripts. So we're thinking slam dunk, like it, we thought slam dunk before, but we had a corrupt judge. But this time around, done deal. So March 2017, we get in there. And we sit before this panel of 3 judges. And there's a central one. Now, the judges are highly political. I mean, they're political appointees, right? They are appointed by whatever government is in at that time. And they're put in for a particular reason. Why? Because it doesn't matter. And many Canadians don't understand this. It doesn't matter whether you have a liberal or a conservative government. The laws are ultimately being dictated by liberal or conservative judges that are still in place. And so many people will become aware of this, like with the Supreme Court appointee that took place right before Trump was no longer president, right? So coming up into, I believe is in October of 2020 was when the Supreme Court appointee was put into position. And there was a big hoo-ha about it in the media, right? Because they were saying, no, you should leave it until, after the election and whatever, right? In case Biden gets in or whatever, however that worked out. So that then it could be a liberal appointee or a Democratic appointee versus a Republican appointee. And the reason being is because they guide the law. And so in Alberta, we have, even though it's a conservative province, we have a lot of liberal judges that have been appointed when the liberal government was in place because they're federal appointees. So literally our laws are being governed and guided within the court systems and case law being established with a liberal flavor based on if they have liberal judges or conservative. And so we get in there and we're apprised of the fact that the one judge who was leading the charge was a conservative appointee, but he was put in for a particular reason and not necessarily because of his merits of being a judge either. And so our lawyers were taking concern with that particular judge being on the panel of 3 judges and him being the head judge leading the whole of it. So he's sitting more in the front, in the middle, whatever, and then the other 2 kind of beside him. And so he starts parroting all this media stuff as if he didn't take the evidence from Factum, but rather from CBC News. And that's when it's becoming concerning. And I'm realizing, we're dealing with an individual here who's already got an apprehension of bias against us. He should have to recuse himself from being a judge. He's not going to be impartial whatsoever on this. And he's just spewing this garbage, right? And I'm just sitting there having to listen to this like, that's not right. No, that's not right. No, I know CBC said that, but that's not right. That's not what happened, right? And obviously I don't have a voice. I'm not able to speak. We're just sitting there observing. And that's a hard thing to contain yourself as you just hear people lying about you, right? So there was another judge. He seemed impartial and but didn't say much one way or the other. And then there was another judge who got a little emotional and said he made the statement at one point in time, and he went off on a tangent on this, and he just said, but by the grace of God go I by. The jury had no choice but to find this couple guilty based on that error in law. And then he went into the case law on it, and he expounded on it, and he made the case very clear that this is a wrongful conviction based on this. The other judge, not the central judge, but the other judge who seemed impartial, he's looking at it and agrees, says, yeah, that's right. Actually, that is in line with the case law, blah, blah, blah. So we're thinking, yes, got it. 2. We need 2 out of the 3 judges to be for us, and we're off, right? So we're thinking we got it. So typically, they will render a decision on that day or within a month and a half. So basically, when you go in for an appeal, you can expect to hear a decision that day or within a month and a half after, right? That's the precedent. That's what's normal, right? Now, we'd already experienced abnormal in relation to the fact that, the previous trial was an absolute gong show. And actually, there was something unprecedented there as well that I didn't mention, that to try to hold to the narrative that was so false, the judge ordered that we have to put up on all of our social media pages his written decision. Even social media pages that we didn't own ourselves personally, but that were close at hand. Like my brother had one and he was operating it. He was ordered to put it onto his social media page, the judge's decision, to try to show that, we were wrong, right? And the judge, obviously elaborated on all this, one-sided garbage from the Crown, because ultimately he guided it so we were found guilty. So he wanted to establish that was the case. Now that's unheard of. That's akin to back in like the 1800s. If you were convicted of something, you'd have to wear like this little sandwich board type of thing on your chest that said what you were convicted of as you're walking around the public, right?
Yeah.
They got rid of that a long time ago. But so anyways, this judge came under criticism from a lot of people within the Law Society for what he had done there, because he just opened another can of worms of saying like, a judge can't say that you have to post this type of stuff on your social media. How can they do that, right? But that was the first of its kind in Canada. So we'd already seen a lot of unprecedented stuff, plus the fact that rather than 18 months to hear an appeal, we're hearing it in like 7-8 months, right? So we're in the courts. We don't hear a decision that day. from the appeal courts. We think that we got 2 against 1 because the one was clearly biased. He's not siding with anything. In fact, he just goes quiet when the truth starts coming out in relation to case law and all that. So we're thinking, okay, fine. Within a month and a half, we'll hear. We don't hear anything. All right. Summer rolls around. Don't hear anything. Fall. Don't hear anything. We finally get to November 15th of 2017. And at this point in time, Colette's pregnant again, right? And it's actually her due date. Okay, so now we're about to have her 5th child. And it's her due date on that day. And that was no secret, right? Because we're going in to see parole officers and stuff like that. Like, there's nothing secret going on in our life at this point in time, right?
Right.
Nothing private, I guess. Not secret, but private even. Like, we have no privacy because we're constantly into the parole officer and having to update them. And anytime that I want to go to BC for work or whatever, we've got an issue there, right? Where I have to get a permission slip. So, anyways, we're now doing that, or no, we're now, it's now November 15th, and we get a phone call from our lawyers saying that they have a decision in, and that we'll have it, or no, it's supplied to us. So we get it, and we realize it's 2-1 against us. And so now I'm supposed to go back to jail. I'm literally supposed to drive myself right back to jail. And, sorry, I think I've jumped over some stuff. We had some other stuff that we're going to get to. So I'm going to end off right there. We're going to revisit some stuff, and I'm going to revisit back to going back to jail.
Wow. So yeah, not only do you have to wait 8 months for that wait, and then you hear back of the 2-1 against. And I guess was the house arrest back on for Colette as well? Like,
everything's supposed to be reinstated. Everything as it was. As soon as we hear that the appeal has been turned down 2-1. I know during this time as well, like before getting there, that there was a bunch of stuff as well that was starting to happen with Truehope, right? Mm-hmm. So May 2016, I'm canceled. And then in January of 2017, there was another attempt to have me canceled. But it didn't really work. So we're still like, we're growing the business like throughout this whole time. And I'm constantly getting permission slips from the probation officer to go to province because I'm traveling and I'm still doing public presentations, and I'm doing a lot of public presentations, and there's no issues. I just had that one canceled at CHFA. Well, there was another one that happened. This is interesting. And this just started to show where the media was going with all of this. Is that I went to go do a public presentation in Prince George, BC. I had done 2 public presentations before that time there. One was hosted in the college, and then another one was hosted at a different venue, actually within the store. And so what was interesting, though, is that this particular health food store that was hosting it, Ave Maria, their clientele were saying, hey, like, is David Stephan coming back again? Like, it was becoming kind of a tradition that it was early January that I would go there for the previous 2 years. And so they'd invited me out again. So I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll go. So I fly in and I get my rental car and I jump in, I start it up, and the radio's on. I go to shut off the radio. And before I had a chance to do so, I was sure I heard my name on the radio. I thought, why am I hearing my name? And so I'm listening now. Fortunately, I didn't shut, like it was perfect timing, right? Because had it been like 20 seconds later, I might not have known what was going on, or 20 seconds earlier, I would have just hit the power button, right? Because I don't listen to the radio.
Right. But
when you hear your name on it, you're thinking, oh, maybe I should listen. So I did. And I start hearing about this like major controversy. And I'd heard nothing about this and this potential protest that's going to happen in Prince George in front of this health food store. I'm thinking, what has taken place here? Like, how did this just blow up? Heard nothing about it. I mean, I've been in communication with the health food store owner. There's no rumblings. Well, it turns out that, some of the media jumped on board, including CBC, and they started to tout that there was going to be a protest to try to create a protest. And now what we were seeing here is that the news wasn't reporting events. They were actually trying to create events. And so they're talking about this big uprising and all this type of stuff. So, I go and I meet with the health food store owner the next day. We spend the whole day together and we're getting stuff set up or whatever. And we're talking about, potential issues, right? And how to deal with it. We get there for the presentation. And, there's a lot of people there. Nobody looks angry. No issues. No protest in front of the store. Nothing. Nothing's going on. Okay. Well, 5 minutes into the presentation, this older gentleman walks in and he's being trailed by the media. Okay. He sits in the back. Media's in the back. Media is now recording this within the health food store. So then I get to the end of the presentation. And now, of course, because there's been a lot of news on me, I talked about our court case to a degree. And this gentleman at the end, during question and answer period, says, you know what? I heard your presentation. Thank you for sharing, blah, blah, whatever. But you're talking about your court case, and, that just doesn't line up with the transcripts. I said, oh, really? Now, remember, this is what we're appealing. We had just purchased 3,500 transcripts or 3,500 pages of transcripts for approximately $35,000 is what it costs just for that. Not lawyers' fees, nothing. Just so now the system is really making a lot of money off of us.
Yeah.
Just having to defend ourselves, right? So, so I said to him, "Oh, the transcripts." I said, "You have the transcripts?" He says, "Yep." I said, "You have all the transcripts?" "Yep." I said, "How did you get your hands on 3,500 pages of transcripts that cost us $35,000? Are you kidding me?" And I said, "And what doesn't line up? Go ahead." Right? And couldn't answer it. Right? No, it just doesn't line up. And you're making dubious claims about this and that and whatever. Right? And I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay. Now his language has just shifted and it matches the exact same language that we see on websites like Quackwatch attacking Truehope. Like, interesting. Okay. We got somebody here who is doing somebody else's bidding, right? Like it sounds like he's part of a network. He's using the same verbiage and everything that we've come against over the years with this particular group that's trying to shut us down, the group that wrote Pink Pills Inc. and everything, right? And so he ends up leaving. Actually, it was interesting because I had to try to shut down the rest of the audience. They were enraged, and they were going to take this guy and lynch him. Now, the media is recording this. They're recording the whole of it. And now this is becoming newsworthy that the whole audience is turning on this guy. And I'm the one that's mic'd. I've got the largest voice there, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to suppress and just say, hey, no, don't worry about it. Just like I'm calming the audience down now. And then I'm saying, hey, I went back there, shook his head and just said, hey, we can have a discussion later. He leaves, goes and does an interview with the media. Media gets what they want. And then they leave and they've got their story. And it's a distorted story. It didn't show the fact that everybody that was there was for me, not against me. And they're still trying to spin this thing, right? And they're trying to set the stage for what would come down the road, which I guess we'll talk about in a future episode. But basically where there was a real interesting concerted effort to try to prevent me from having a voice and speaking about our game-changing or life-changing supplements. So that was the first one where there was an issue. Now, what's of interest is it was only a few days later that I had a presentation just north of Prince George up in Dawson Creek, BC. And there wasn't any issues. None. Because the media wasn't aware of it. And so the media wasn't aware of it. It's being advertised. Not obviously in the media, but it's being advertised over social media and stuff. I go to this presentation and nothing. Not a concern. Crickets. Just like the previous presentations that I've been doing from summer of 2016 up until January of 2017. Still no issues. I'm going to health shows, right? Like Vancouver Health Show, November of 2016. I'm presenting there, right? I'm presenting at all these different places and there's still no issues. But then all of a sudden Prince George, CBC rears their ugly head and including the local media there too. And they make an attack and try to say that there's going to be a protest. Why? Because they were hoping for a protest. Nobody showed up for the protest though, right? Like it just anyways. So now we start to see the agenda here that the media has, that it's not necessarily about me. It's about natural health, and it's about attacking true hope at that point, and that they're merely exploiting my story and my son's death, and putting a spin on it so that they can try to incite vitriol from the general public against us and have me basically muzzled.
And not allowing the truth to come from you to speak to people who, if you speak to yourself, you speak to another person for an hour on a topic such as this, it's got so much emotion with it, so much drama, so much volatility. You can't lie about those types of things, like the authenticity, the fact that you'd be so genuine about it. And if you're able to have an audience of 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 individuals listening to that story, then they understand what actually really happened in that court, and they understand which narrative is true and which is not, and they can't allow the truth of the situation to take over the majority of opinion.
We're gonna see in I believe it's the next episode, if not the one after, but I think it's next episode. We're gonna see what you just discussed there really come to pass in relation to the great lengths or the great efforts that the Crown would go through to try to prevent me from being able to speak. When they, it makes for a really interesting story. I mean, it only gets better from here on out in relation to the incredible amount of drama and stuff like that, as well as the exposure of corruption. And so we're going to see that emerge over the next few episodes. I'm looking forward to sharing that, but so as to not create a spoiler,
Sure.
I won't mention what's extremely relevant to what you just said there about them just trying to completely eradicate my ability to speak. Because when I speak, I mean, I'm speaking from the heart, and I've got nothing to hide, right? Like, come and ask the questions. I learned years ago, many years ago, that life is just so much easier when you just speak the truth.
Yeah.
And live, and that you conduct yourself in a way that you can feel comfortable speaking the truth, that you don't feel that you have something to hide. That's incredibly liberating. And that, I mean, we are our greatest oppressors in relation to the fact that we begin to hide stuff in our life, right? And that we don't feel that we can just be open. So we're always hiding something, and it's a phenomenal source of oppression within our own minds that we live with day in and day out when we conduct ourselves that way. And I've learned, just scrap that. Like, don't live in such a way that you ever feel that you have anything to hide. Obviously, exercise prudence, and you don't need to go sharing everything with everybody and casting pearls before swine. But the fact of the matter is that when I speak, I think people pick up on the fact that I'm just being authentic and that they can trust me. And the Crown did not want me having a voice in this whole matter. CBC was supposed to have the last word on what took place in the death of my son, and that somehow he was fed through an eyedropper, and that we were trying to cure bacterial meningitis with fruit and juice and smoothies laced with horseradish and hot pepper and onion and all sorts of stuff, as if a child would drink a smoothie that had those ingredients. It just, the whole thing is just so incredibly tabloid. And the fact that some people actually believed it, I'm just shocked. Like, it just highlights a lack of deductive reasoning. You can't feed somebody through an eyedropper, and you're not going to feed a 1.5-year-old a smoothie with hot peppers, garlic, onion, horseradish. Like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, sensationalized nonsense news. And I think, I mean, this all happened like 2016, 2017. And we're seeing now that the legacy media is dead. It's dying. It's like, it's not journalism. It's not truth. It's pure agenda. And people, it might take them 10 years, but they'll figure it out eventually that they're being gaslighted and it's not truth.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing more and more now are actually seeing the individuals who actually have integrity and courage and have that actual inkling to be a journalist. They are stepping out of the legacy media. They're stepping into doing their own podcast, doing their own shows, doing their own actual journalism, rather than this agenda-based garbage, which is just, it's just poisoning the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing more and more. You can't even call the legacy media mainstream anymore, because there'll be individual people with YouTube channels or Rumble channels that do daily shows that get significant more views than CBC, CTV, all these different outlets. So I think more and more people are, waking up to the fact that, what they might see on the news. I can't remember the last time I watched the news, but yeah, it's just like the same repetitive fear-based propagandist nonsense. And, who are you? Why would you even believe what's being said there? And yeah, as I say, more and more people within even that industry are recognizing what a ridiculous farce, what a ridiculous just game it is. And yeah, we're seeing more and more people creep out of that.
What's really been encouraging over the years here is to meet people that have no idea who I am. Like, no idea, which is shocking, right? With the amount of time that we've been in the media, we thought everybody knew who we were. But we've actually met people that have no clue who we are, no clue what's taking place. And the only thing you can conclude is you don't watch media. Because if you did, you would clearly know who I was.
Yeah.
You would have had some emotional triggers take place for or against me, and you would know the story. And because it's been an ongoing story for 9 years, but really heated for 5 years, right, in the media. Like, it was pretty prevalent off and on, like, for a few months, like just solid, right? And then you wouldn't hear about us for a couple months, and then you'd hear an odd story here. And then all of a sudden, for another week, it would be a story like where constantly media is reporting. But there's people out there that had no clue who we were or what our story was. And that's just really refreshing to recognize that there's people out there just like us that don't consume that. I'm going to put it this way because it's more fitting. Not so much pure agenda or agenda driven, because it is, but the proper term is the propaganda. And the reason why it's propaganda is when you take a look at who's funding them, largely. I mean, CBC is a Crown-owned organization, and they're getting funded by taxpayers, but they're getting funded by the taxpayers to deceive the taxpayers. It's really interesting, right? I mean, the taxpayers are actually paying for their own demise,
right?
As they're led down the garden path, or led like lambs to the slaughter, if you will. And that's what CBC is doing. But even the other media outlets are receiving the government bailouts. They're all indebted to the government. They're all enslaved to the government. The government is their master. And so if you want more bailouts, you're going to speak what you want us to speak, or you're going to speak against us, right? So really what we have in play here is all of the media is beholden to the government, and they need to speak what's government approved. Otherwise, they may not get the next bailout. That's what we're dealing with right now. And so that's why we see in this age now, over the last handful of years, where these media outlets have gone from trying to report, fair stuff somewhat. I mean, obviously they have to serve whoever their master is, which is the greatest advertisers or funders behind the scenes, to now they are full propaganda machines, all of them. And the problem is that most people are incapable of discerning that they're a propaganda machine because they're all speaking it. So, if CBC was an outlier and they were speaking one thing, whereas all the other outlets are speaking something else, then you'd have say, wait a minute, why is CBC so far off here? Like that's incredible. Like they're covering it from a completely different angle. That the government must be having their say through the fact that they're a government corporation, right? A Crown-owned corporation. But when all of them are speaking the same thing, most people won't question it, right? They'll say, oh, it must be the truth. They're all speaking it, right? They're all speaking it. But we even saw that with our court case, where you could take all of these different headlines, all these different video headlines, and overlap them. And it was the same word for word narrative. All of the US-based media, Canadian-based media, we've got all this stuff, and you just like one after the next, it's just these parrots just talking, exact same script.
Yeah.
They're not independent. There is no journalism within these propaganda machines anymore. It's just scripts, and they're all given the same script. And very rarely do they ever deviate from it, even by a few words. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, all saying the same thing. And I just think about those compilations of news stories in America where it's like, no, should you take the vaccine for COVID-19? We'll come back here, and after the break, we'll tell you all about it. Sponsored by Pfizer. Yeah, it's just incredible. Yeah, if you're not aware to that, then I don't know what you're doing on this planet. But we are going to finish up there. Thank you very much, David. That concluded part 5.
Right. So hold on. So where did we finish? So just so that we know what we're ending off on or starting off on the next one.
Yeah.
We just went through the appeal court, right?
Right.
And we need a 2-1 decision on the 15th, right? Or no, on the 15th of November, this 2-1 decision comes out, but it's actually not for us, it's against us.
That's right.
CBC does an article, right?
We do actually have one article to share here. Yeah, that's right.
They did an article and okay, yeah. Sorry. There was a loose end there. I was trying to think.
Yeah.
I parked it before we jumped into the end because I know I got ahead of myself there. Before we get into the next episode, but yeah, so we get a 2-1 decision against us on the 15th on Colette's due date, and I'm supposed to drive myself into jail. And so I just said, no, you know what? I'm not driving myself into jail. I'm not going to jail today, right? I'm thinking they're going to have to come get me, right? And so rather than driving myself into jail, I went and wrote an article, a scathing article, and posted it online to ensure that people knew what my stance was, and the fact that it's so convenient that on Colette's due date that they bring this decision forward and I'm supposed to go back to jail so that I can't witness the birth of what would end up being my first daughter. And so I'm like, I'm not going to jail. You want me in jail? You come and get me, right? In essence, like that's the way it's going to go. And so, yeah, anyways, CBC covered it. And they were dumb enough to actually link directly to my Facebook page, and my following skyrocketed. So the amount of people that had the ability to see the truth after that point in time was phenomenal. CBC would never make that mistake again. And I just said, you know, I was scathing against the judiciary. I just said there is no room for truth, no room for love, any of this or no room for justice within the courts. And it was bang on. And sadly, a lot of people resonated with that because they recognize the same corruption within the judiciary. So now I'm supposed to go back to jail. I write that post, and I guess that's where we end off because we're going to find out whether they came and got me or what in the next episode, right?
That's right. Perfect. Yeah, that's a great place to segue into part 6, which will be with you guys next week. But thank you so much, David, for coming in and sharing that wild story with a lot of emotional context in there as well. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Simon. Looking forward to the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's part 5 finished up of the Truehope Family Files. You guys have got episode 6, 7, and 8 to come. Thanks again, David. We're going to be back with part 6 next week, which is titled Media Gang Stalking and Rook the Crook. And be sure to leave us a review on iTunes. You can give us a star review on Spotify as well. And be sure to share this episode with friends and family. But that is it from us. We'll see you next week.